Travis Reier, the BamaOnline.com staff, following the media viewing periods at Thursday's football practice on the University of Alabama. We are in Coleman Coliseum, which was in the news today because the Crimson Tide, of course, formally introducing new men's basketball coach Nate Oats coming in from the University of Buffalo. Greg Byrne, athletics director at the university, making that announcement, making that introduction earlier today over at the Malmore Athletic Facility. Oats comes to UA after a stretch of 3 NCAA tournament appearances in 4 seasons of coaching the Bulls. So a guy in terms of checking boxes as a riser, as a trender in college basketball coaching circles. That would seem to be Nate Oats, a guy that I think you could justly say deserves an opportunity to take his shot at the Power 5 level, and that's what he's going to do here at UA. And in talking around to some different people, both here at UA and back up in Buffalo, consensus is it's a promising hire. I don't go as far as to say it's a slam dunk in terms of success for the future for Alabama men's basketball, but potential is there. I think you're going to like the style of play with Nate Oats. It's going to be very much up-tempo. It's going to be a shot about every 15 seconds, first good shot. You're going to see Nate Oats' teams take that opportunity. Going to be similar in some ways, I would say, stylistically to Auburn. And I know a lot of Alabama fans, they cringe when they hear that association. But look, the Tigers are in the Sweet 16, and they've done it largely on good man-to-man pressure defense, creating turnovers, points off turnovers, and of course, the three-point shot. And Nate Oats at Buffalo, his team's averaged right around 28 three-point attempts per game. So there's going to be threes a-flying inside Coleman Coliseum, beginning with the 2019-2020 season. Now, from a personnel standpoint, that's obviously Nate Oats' initial challenge, both in terms of roster restoration, trying to keep some guys in the program like Kira Lewis. Got 3 or 4 guys in that transfer portal right now. John Petty, Dazon Ingram is pretty much on his way out. Daniel Giddens, I would think, is moving on as well. But Kira Lewis, key, keeping him around. He would be very, very popular, already very, very popular out there on the transfer market. So some challenges for Nate Oats as he hits the ground running here in Tuscaloosa. From a football standpoint, Alabama back out there today in full pads in advance of Saturday's scrimmage. We got 3 scrimmages coming up over the back half of 2019 spring drill. So going to be scrimmage heavy, and that includes, of course, 8A coming up in a couple of 3 Saturdays at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Now, Alabama out there today working from an injury standpoint similar to Tuesday in that Matt Womack was on the practice field with the offensive lineman. Didn't look like he was doing much of anything at all during individual drills. Had knee braces on today, which was a little bit different than Tuesday. Looked to be actually geared more towards practicing, but we didn't see him doing much while we were out there. Terrell Lewis on the practice field, out there with the outside linebackers, with Sal Sunseri, not doing much of anything at all himself. Caught a glimpse a little bit of the defense early on during the media viewing periods. The first couple of 3 groups, and probably more interesting from the back 7 standpoint than the front 4 or the front 3, because those guys are about what you would expect right now. Your first group, Fadarian Mathis, LaBryan Ray, Raekwon Davis. Second group, you're getting into Vita Musika at nose tackle, Christian Barmore at one of the end positions, Justin Aboigbe, the early enrollee in that mix. You've got Antonio Alfano in that mix, DJ Dale at nose tackle. So those groups were about what you would expect. Inside linebacker didn't look like much has changed there either. Dylan Moses, Josh McMillan working at the inside spots. Outside, what we saw was a Yabi Anoma, but I think that has to do again with Terrell Lewis's limited to nil availability right now. Christopher Allen perhaps somewhat in that same boat, although we saw Christopher Allen go through individual drills for the most part. So the back end, the secondary, we saw some things today that were of note. Not so much at corner because Trayvon Diggs and Patrick Surtain II are obvious guys at those spots. But at safety, we saw Xavier McKinney and Jared Maiden in that base sort of shell secondary back there. Then you saw guys like Daniel Wright, with Shyheim Carter at the safety position, Jalen Armour-Davis, Josh Jobe at the corner. So a little bit of a glimpse into some things there in the secondary today. You know, and in terms of how that's going to transition in the nickel and dime packages, you know, a dime look that you might see at least in the first scrimmage or two. Although Alabama typically in the spring doesn't employ a lot of dime package. You see a lot of base and nickel in the spring. But a potential dime secondary, looking at it right now, you know, you could have a couple of different combinations. Your corners, Josh Jobe, Patrick Surtain II, Trayvon Diggs at the nickel, Xavier McKinney at the money position in the dime, and then your safeties, Jared Maiden, Daniel Wright, maybe Shyheim Carter's in there somehow in that mix as well, in a 6-man defensive backfield. So just some observations from the practice field today. Had some funny stuff out there. Anthony Jennings lost his footing a little bit in an individual drill right in front of the media. Sal Sunseri informed the reporters that were videoing the drill to erase it in no uncertain terms, I guess you could say. Only as Sal can say it is a better way of putting that, I guess. Saw the defensive lineman up close today. I thought Brian Baker was a little more vocal than maybe we've seen him, at least in the first 5 or 6 practices of spring ball. Really kind of pushing his guys through those drills today. You know, offensive line work really wasn't all that different. Again, Womack looked like he was limited. So, you know, right now, the interior, you're looking at Chris Owens at center, Emil Ekiyor at a guard, maybe Evan Neal at a guard, Deontay Brown obviously in that mix as well. So kind of some mixing and matching at different positions for this team right now. With that, if you got any questions or comments, we'll try to get to them right now. Anything today? Looks like they've been doing some gymnastics in here, by the way. Getting ready for those regionals. I think Dana Duckworth taking her team up to Ann Arbor. Hey, Jimmy in Gulf Shores. That's not a bad place to be tuning in from. Pretty nice down there, Gulf Shores. Michael asking if Paul Bryant Jr. out there checking on Paul Tyson. I've seen Paul Jr. At least once out there watching practice. You see Tua's dad out there watching both his sons. So, yeah, from that standpoint, there's been a sighting or two this spring, I guess you could say. How do I think the Alabama defense will be different this year compared to previous years? It's a great question. You know, I don't think schematically it's going to change all that much. I think personnel-wise, obviously, that's where the biggest changes are coming in when you're having to break in a new inside linebacker to go along with Dylan Moses. You're breaking in a guy or two in the secondary, perhaps. You're getting some guys back from injury at outside linebacker. So I don't think the approach is going to change all that much, but I think the faces are going to be the biggest difference, and not just in terms of personnel, but also the guys coaching those guys. Maybe a little more defined structure in terms of you know, the staff itself, with Pete Golding as the defensive coordinator, Charles Kelly in a role of helping out as a co-coordinator on the back end. Maybe that'll change things a little bit. 8A game coverage on the 13th, either ESPN or ESPN2, I believe. Yeah, not sure exactly of that. I need to look. Rod, I don't know how Trey Sanders looks today because Trey Sanders is not here yet. Be here this summer. There you go. ESPN, ESPN2, Aaron chimes in with. Randy asking about Mac Jones. Mac looks good. You know, Mac's never going to blow Mac Jones. Mac's never going to totally just blow your doors off. But I would say he's become more precise in what he does. He's going to prove to be, I think, a guy that's efficient, if not entirely dynamic. I do think he's got a little more down the field ability throwing the football than people maybe give him credit for. But, you know, with all the talk about Taulia Tagovailoa and Paul Tyson Jr., and I think those guys are in the mix to push Mac Jones for that number 2 job. You know, Mac, as I've said before, he's not the kind of guy that's going to roll over for anybody. Ali Cahoe, Matt wants to know about. From what we've seen, Matt, Ali has been working with Shane Lee in that sort of third group. You've had Dylan Moses, Josh McMillan up top. You've had Markel Benton, Jalen Moody there with the twos, and Ali still getting back after missing a couple of practices to start spring drills, pairing up with Shane Lee. Tight end, it's a good question. Miller Forrestall obviously is probably where that deal starts. I don't think there's any probably about it. We're getting to a point with the Cameron Latou situation where I'm not ready to say it's graduated from experiment to full-blown position change, but it's interesting that it's continued, even with Terrell Lewis looking to be largely shut down for the rest of spring at outside linebacker. You do still have good enough numbers at outside linebacker to stick with Latou, but there's nothing they have to make in terms of a decision hard and fast on that. But Major Tennyson's still there, Kedrick James. You've got some quality talent. It's just a matter of someone stepping up as sort of that primary guy first and foremost, like a Miller Forrestall. But as we know, you've got to have a second or third guy in this offense. It's a multiple tight end offense. Chris wants to know about the alpha dog on defense. It's a good question. I really thought a year ago it'd be Mack Wilson. I don't think that ever took for the 2018 defense. Dylan Moses could be that guy, taking over as the primary inside linebacker, the every down inside linebacker. I don't know if he's the most vocal guy out there in terms of bringing that sort of intensity. But I think his play could do that. C.J. Mosley was kind of that way. That's probably who I would compare Dylan to from that standpoint. I mean, C.J. could get excited, but he wasn't a presence maybe like a Rolando McClain. There's different ways to do it. I'm always going to probably go with that every down inside linebacker first and foremost, though. Although it could be one of those guys up front. Could be Xavier McKinney at center. Cornelius, the running backs look good. The problem with the running backs and us is that they often, when the team works outside, they work out across the practice fields from us. So we don't get many up close looks at them. And there hasn't been a rainy practice. So when it rains, we get the team inside. That makes it easier for us to watch the running backs. But they all look good. I mean, Najee Harris looks great. Brian Robinson, I think, set to do some really good things in 2019. I don't think that's going to be a major surprise to anybody if it plays out that way. Jerome Ford has some really nice burst. Looks like he's been through a good run through the offseason program. Then you're going to add Trey Sanders coming in here, and Shadarius Townsend has been working with the running backs this spring.